Hello, Clan MacEwen. I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to the members of the Clan MacEwen Society. It is a pleasure to present this whiskey tasting to those who choose to join in and have fun. After all, we all love whiskey and good company. Well, I'm Rick Ewing and have been a member of the Society for a number of years and attended the last in-person AGM in 2019 with my wife Chris, son Kelson, and daughter Bailey. And the four of us are hoping to return to the 2022 AGM as well. Some of you might remember me as the non-German speaking piper that was at the AGM. And in 2019, I also had the distinct honor of being elected a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, along with my friend and fellow clansman, Ross MacEwen. So by now, hopefully, you've acquired the menu of whiskey that was sent out via Facebook a week or so ago. But before we begin, there are a few starting points to keep in mind. First is the glassware. So, like many enthusiasts, I recommend the Glencairn whiskey glass. And that is what you see here in front of me. The shape is designed to help concentrate aromas for nosing, which is ideal for tasting sessions. The small size of the glass is also helpful, as you will be doing small pours. Well, I recommend small pours, but I suppose that it's your choice since you're at home joining in. Nosing is an important part of the tasting experience, and I encourage you to spend some time simply smelling the whiskeys. Start with a light sniff around the outside of the glass, the back side, the front side, and then progressively stick your nose deeper into the glass, eventually, while gently swirling the contents. Now, of course, you don't need to buy special glasses for this. White wine glasses will work just fine. Basically, anything with a bit of a tulip shape is ideal. So having a good number of clean glasses will be helpful, but you can always rinse out and reuse between samplings. So on that point, you'll also need to have two sources of water on hand, one for drinking and one for adding to the whiskeys. The water for dilution must be non-carbonated and ideally at room temperature. I tend to use filtered water or bottled spring water, or some people say still water. Having water available to drink, especially if you don't drink whiskey often, can be necessary given how concentrated whiskey is. And I always encourage people to try adding a little water to their whiskeys during tastings to experience how flavors change with water. And the key here is little. Don't ever try to pour water into whiskey directly from a pitcher or a jug. No matter how steady you think your hands are, you will flood and drown the whiskey. A teaspoon can work well. You can just spoon in, a little bit of water, a few drops at a time. I like using a straw. You dip it into a shallow glass and pull out just a few drops and place it. I actually prefer what we call an eyedropper, and that way I can put it into that water and just a drop or two at a time can add it to the whiskeys. And when you add water to whiskey, a few drops at a time, whiskey flavors are easier to identify because you're lowering the relative alcohol content and sequentially diluting your whiskey, so just a few drops at a time, helps to open up new flavors that you can experience. And lastly, before we begin, I generally like doing tastings after I have eaten, being sure to give the food a chance to settle for an hour or so. It's very true that what you eat can have an influence on how the whiskeys will taste. So I recommend against eating spicy food or ones with a lot of garlic right before a tasting. And also serving black coffee ahead of time can be useful to cleanse the palate. So while I love putting on whiskey dinners where the whiskey is paired with the food courses, when I am specifically tasting whiskey for the enjoyment and evaluation of the whiskey, I don't like serving any food. Although plain bread or saltine crackers, as some of you may know these as water biscuits, they may be beneficial to help cleanse the palate between whiskeys. So, let's jump in, shall we? I have to apologize. I did start ahead of you, and since I added some water, I thought I'd better taste it. So, whiskey. Scotland, Ireland, Canada, Japan, India, France, Wales, United States, Tasmania. Is it the same? Yes. Is it different? Yes. You know, language says more about the differences in whiskey than any amount of technical detail. So in Ireland, a person asks for whiskey by brand name, you know, a Paddy or a Dumphy or the generic, sometimes a ball of malt. In Scotland, they'll ask for a single malt by name or a label by name and ask for a dram, a nip, a tot, or the older term, but affectionate term, the wee goldie. Americans are going to ask for a belt or a slug or a shot. So each is a different drink drunk differently. They just happen to all be made in stills, all called whiskey, and all have that power to gain kindnesses from associates, objects of our affection, and our friends. I love to refer to whiskey as a wonderful social lubricant. So now, we're going to talk about tasting Scotch single malt whiskey now, and everyone will experience a variety of these whiskeys side by side. We talked about how to nose a whiskey. Now, let's talk about how to taste a whiskey. You're going to put the tiniest amount on the tongue. Take your tongue and let that whiskey, let that flavor cover your entire mouth. And as you do this, you will salivate and dilute the whiskey, and this will release new flavors to your palate. So the amount is so tiny, there's really not even much to be able to swallow. And speaking of tasting whiskey, we're wasting time. We only have about 20 more minutes to share with you, so we got to get busy. And if we go too rapidly, the beauty of YouTube is you can pause the tasting at any given point and resume at your leisure. So our first whiskey that we have is the Arran Malt, 14 years old. Now, the Arran Malt, which is what I already have in my glass here, it comes, or it's produced by the Lochranza distillery. And the Lochranza distillery is located in, of all places, Lochranza on the Isle of Arran. Now, this distillery is a wee bit under 2 hours from Kilfinnan and involves the ferry from Portavadie to Tarbert, a short drive followed by the Lochranza Clonake ferry, and of course the trip might be shorter or longer depending on the ferry schedule. But the distillery construction was finished in 1995, and the first spirits were distilled in June of that year. And the visitor center was opened in August of that same year by Her Majesty the Queen, and 2 casks were presented to her for Princes William and Harry. And these casks are still slumbering peacefully in warehouse number 1. But let's get to the glass. So, That's lovely. Soft raisins and sultanas. Or we in the States would say white raisins. There's a really gentle vanilla and stone fruit like peaches. And gingerbread and a salty citrus tang. Honey and toffee. Oh, that's lovely. The palate experiences quite a flavor journey. It changes a lot. And the arrival begins with this rush of apple or pear, after which the charred oak lies right in the mid palate. And this gives way to a touch of vanilla, honey, soft cereal, some, for lack of a better term, a salty orange, this salty citrus. And the finish is very warming, decently long, with no unpleasant notes. It is a spirity, dry finish for a whiskey with this fruity sweetness. And one thing that you find is that Arran is quite a dual personality, and when you add water to it, it opens up considerably. And a lot of times when you give it some water and just let it set for a few moments, it rewards your patience. So pour yourself another dram, add a few drops of water, and let it aerate for a few minutes to let lesser alcohols evaporate with the addition of water. So that is a beautiful whiskey. So at this point, feel free to hit the pause button while you do this, and I'll just be here waiting for a while. Okay, you're back. All right. So I mentioned something last time. I talked of lesser alcohols, and before our next whiskey comes, I can imagine how some of you kind of cast sideways glances at me through your monitor when I say that I smell or taste vanilla or apples or bananas or hay or Band-Aids. You see, when all of the chemical reactions happen in the distillation and maturation processes, there are compounds created that are the same ones in various items we come in contact with in our everyday world. So, while there might not be any real bananas in the glass in front of you, there might be some real isoamyl acetate, which is an organic compound that is the ester formed from isoamyl alcohol, which is one of those aforementioned lesser alcohols, and acetic acid. Boom. Bananas. And so this is why you find all of the various aromas and flavors and textures in the glass in front of you. It's truly there. So I'd like to challenge everyone to try and find those familiar aromas and flavors and try to associate them with a memory that is in your brain. So let's do that with the next whiskey. The Oban Distillery is just off George Street on Stafford, which looks like an alley or a close to me. It's just across the street from Julie's Coffee House, which has lovely coffee and pastries. And it's been making whiskey since 1794, and it's still going strong. So this distillery lies 2 hours from Kilfinnan, and you have two options to get there. You leave Kilfinnan and go around the end of Loch Fyne back over to Inverare, go north on the A85 and take that into the north side of Oban. Or my favorite is to take the Portavati Tarbert Ferry and go north to Loch Gilpin, where you take the A816 through Kilmartin Glen into the south side of Oban. Such a beautiful drive. Now, the whiskey that we'll be tasting, the Oban Little Bay, was originally part of Oban's travel-only retail offerings, but it has since graduated to their core line. They use whiskey that is matured in refill American oak hogsheads, bourbon hogsheads, European oak sherry casks, and refill casks with new ends on the cask for this expression, before allowing the resultant single malt whiskeys to marry in small oak casks. So let's see what we have in this lovely bottle here. This is lovely. Dried apples, floral herbs, and there's a hint of mint in there, believe it or not. Some orange and a touch of milky coffee or latte. Oh, beautiful whiskey. Chocolates with sea salt and pound cake that's topped with brown or demerara sugar and cinnamon. And there the orange returns to the mid palate. And that finish, it's lovely. It just keeps going. It's like baked apples with cinnamon and ginger on it. And being, as the distillery is right there on the harbor, it has a seashore salinity that coats the tongue. Very creamy whiskey. Very beautiful. Highly recommend this whiskey. Wonderful. So, single malt whiskey is old. Historically speaking, I mean. So in 1994, whiskey celebrated its 500th birthday in Scotland. Before that time, only a few monasteries knew about the production of malt whiskey. And outside of these strongholds of knowledge, its production was a secret. So beer was brewed from barley, but how to make whiskey from beer remained a mystery. So 100 years later, there was no more secret. The first distilleries outside of the monasteries had already been established, and as of 1700, almost every farm in Scotland distilled whiskey as a sideline. There were no alcohol taxes, and each farmer tried in turn to turn some of their hard work into money for the farm and the family. So let's move into our next bottling. Springbank Distillery lies at the south end of the Mull of Kintyre in Camelton and has been making its amber bead since 1828. It can be a fair bit less than a 2-hour journey from Kilfennan. And once again, you take the Portavati Tarbert ferry across to the Mull, and you head south on the A83. And you'll find the distillery about 1 block from the harbor. And This particular whiskey is blended from a mixture of bourbon and sherry casks, and the light color doesn't really tell the story of the richness and character that you find in this glass. It's slightly peated. Springbank does produce 3 different whiskeys: unpeated, lightly peated, and heavily peated. And this is the slightly peated version, called Springbank after the distillery. And it also marries a complex mixture of maritime notes, as well as a very fresh and fruity balance. And this whiskey, I think you will find, speaks to a lot of parts of your flavor organs. Wow. The nose offers up a wide range of aromas, from citrus fruits to pears to peat. There's tanniny oak in there. There are exotic spices, tropical fruits, honey, and soft smoke. Oh, what a profile. Well, let's see what happens. Wow. A very full, sweet, creamy palate with hints of smoke, peat. There's marzipan in there as well. And from the American oak, you get vanilla and nutmeg and cinnamon. And you get that real strong, salty characteristic of Springbank. Wow. I highly recommend this whiskey. And actually, all the whiskeys we're going to try today, I highly recommend. They have many fans all over the world. A slight addition of water lets you taste the spice of that European oak, and it accentuates that maritime saltiness. And the finish, it's a smoky finish, not so peaty, but it's a smoky finish that trails off to sweet cider and toasted barley. It's as I've said before on some of the others, it's a lovely whiskey. So, our next whiskey, we're going to move right on in, and I think after that one was so bold, I think I need a cracker. So our next whiskey, shall we move on? One of the most often mispronounced distilleries, Auchentoshan Distillery, is less than 2 hours from Kilfinnan. To visit, you can take the B8000 to the end of Loch Fyne and travel south to Tarbet. And from there, you'll drive along the west shore of Loch Lomond into the fringes of Glasgow, where the distillery is just off the A82, not far from the Dalmuir Golf Club. Its name in Gaelic means corner of the field, and it's also known as Glasgow's malt whiskey due to its proximity to Glasgow and the breakfast whiskey due to its sweet and delicate nature. So it's been in production since 1823. Now this particular single malt is matured in 3 different casks, namely Pedro Jimenez sherry casks, bourbon casks, and Oloroso sherry casks. And a unique thing about this malt is that unlike almost every Scotch whiskey, this is a triple distilled whiskey instead of twice distilled. There's great debate between Scotland and Ireland. The Irish like to distill their whiskeys 3 times, and they say it makes it much softer, easier to drink. The Scots claim that that 3rd distillation removes all the flavor. So the debate goes on. So let's see what we have in this glass. Oh, wow. Wow. Wow, cooked fruit. Lots of sherry from the Oloroso sherry and the Pedro Jimenez. Toffee and malted grain. And this, yeah, this almost has like a dark rum like quality. Let's try the palate here. Wow. Rich. Very rich. Very soft. Cherries in dark chocolate or cherry cordials. Man. A lot of sherried fruit. Ripe, dark cherries. You know, because of the chocolate and cherries, I get Black Forest cake. And a barrel-aged rum. And the toffee I mentioned earlier on the nose, it's one that's darkly cooked. Just not burnt, but just darkly cooked toffee. Wow. What a dynamite glass. And this finish is superb. It reminds me of a dark treacle and a lot of those cooked toffee notes and wood notes. There's white pepper there as well. And the sweet is balanced with this drying bitter note on the back of the tongue. It's extremely well balanced. Oh, that is a really big whiskey, and I would encourage you to discover that one. That's Auchentoshan Three Wood is the whiskey, and you know, I don't think I mentioned the Springbank, which one we were doing, but that was the Springbank 10 years old. So, you have probably noticed that some Scotch whiskies are very, and I use this term, smoky. So in the making of whiskey, you must malt the barley so that the starches are converted to sugars. So to do this, the grain is soaked in water and it's spread out on the malting floor where it's turned every 4 hours, day and night. And this prevents the wet grain from molding. So as the barley germinates, the sugar conversion happens, but then the grain must be dried to stop the germination at the optimum sugar content. And to do this, a heat source is stoked under the malting floor, and the grain is slowly dried. And that stops the germination, stops the conversion of sugars, and you have these little bitty grains with roots coming out of them and green thing poking out of the end. So it's time to stop that, and let's use it for something more beneficial. So in this drying process, some distilleries will take peat and it's laid on a fire, and the smoke from this burning peat imbues the grain with that essence. And the essence never leaves the process. What is peat? It's pre-coal. It's organic matter that has been covered by water. It's been decades and centuries of plant material. It's seaweed. It's all of these natural things that have decomposed, and it almost looks like dirt that burns. So when this peat is burned, which has been used for fuel for thousands of years in Scotland in particular, it is the essence of what it is made of. So as this burns and the essence imbues this grain, it goes all the way through until the end of the process. And that peat essence is still in this bottle. And so what you are tasting when you get hold of these peaty whiskeys is essentially a 10,000-year-old Atlantic storm crashing onto the shores of, in this case, Islay. You know, wine lovers might call the flavor of the earth in their wine, they talk of the terroir. And I believe this is the ultimate terroir. So our last distillery is on the island of Islay. Now, while the distance is not very far, this trip actually takes about 3.5 hours because it involves 2 ferries. First, we take the ferry from Portavati again, and when it gets to Tarbert, we drive 11 minutes across the Mull of Kintyre to Kennacraig, where we catch the second ferry out to Port Ellen. Then we drive a short 8 minutes to Ardbeg Distillery. Now, one of my favorites, this is a phenomenal distillery that's been packing powerful, peaty deliciousness since 1815. And Ardbeg, 10 years old, is a favorite of many whiskey lovers around the world. This single malt matures for a decade before being bottled without any chill filtration. Now, if you're after a whiskey that's full of coastal air and smoke and the seashore, this is exactly what you want. It is Islay in a glass. So let's see, what do we have here? A beginning of vanilla leads to a cloud of peat. Which is capped with citrus fruits and sea spray. And And I find a really sweet shortbread. Let's say it like a sugar sprinkled shortbread. Let's see what's in the glass. Oh. So that sugar sprinkled shortbread I talked about is now accompanied by sweet vanilla. Add to that the lush flavors of ripe fruit. And then right behind that, you get that Ardbeg peat and smoke that I love. Now the finish on this is long and beautiful. Sea salted caramel, shortbread, you get a hint of citrus and some embers of white pepper. And beach bonfire smoke. Overall, this is, Ardbeg is a balance between sweet sugar and big smoke. I think when I talk Ardbeg, it just strikes me as sweet smoke. Well, long after this is over, I'm still going to be getting to enjoy these, and I hope you are too. So, well, clansfolk, I hope that you have enjoyed this tasting as part of the offerings of Clan MacEwen Society to its membership. Our family all look forward to when we can do this together in Kilfinnan. But until then, let's all stay in touch. And for those of you who are not, I heartily encourage you to become members of Clan MacEwen Society and not just Facebook participants, because the lifeblood of our clan and its future depends on each one of you. So I look forward to seeing you all in Kilfinnan. Reveresco.